This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me, you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend. I've walked your snow-capped mountains.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicoast. Today is September 3rd, 2020, and this is episode 205.
I'm Scott de Lindeboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, we interview Cam Brewer, the third of three candidates for the leadership of BC Greens, and we'll look at the candidates who are going to be seeking your vote in BC's next election, whether that's in a couple months or in a year. Thank you to the 98 people who contribute to our show every month, help keep us growing at patreon.com/Politicoast. And I know money is tight for a lot of people right now, so if you can't contribute, we understand. Please help us keep the show growing by helping share this episode. With today's episode, we'll have interviewed all three leadership candidates for the BC Greens. In episode 179, we talked to Sonia Firstenow. In episode 198, we talked to Kim Darwin. And today we'll talk to Cam Brewer. Post this on social media, Reddit, wherever you use, and tell people to listen. And listen to those old episodes. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Let's kick it off with our interview with Cam Brewer for the BC Greens. We'll throw it over to that now. Joining us now is Cam Brewer, one of the three leadership candidates for the Green Party of British Columbia. Cam, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. Yes, happy to be here. Thank you.
So you just got off a debate. How did that go?
Great. Tonight was the final debate. It was with the Nelson Creston Riding Association. And there's been a long series of debates throughout the campaign with the different riding associations. So members in those communities can ask about particular issues and so on. And then we had one official debate earlier this week available to everybody. And it's been, they've all been really good. It's been nice to talk about the big issues facing the province and the big policy differences between the Greens and the other parties, the things that I'd be able to bring as leader of the party. But it's also nice in each community to hear about the particular implications of those policy ideas in a specific location and hear about where their concerns are and what's facing them. So no, tonight was no exception to that. It was a good conversation focused on the Kootenays, a place where I actually used to live. So it felt a little bit like a homecoming in a way.
Well, let's jump into this. Why are you running for leader?
For 30 years, I've been bringing people together to create solutions at the intersection of the environment and the economy. So for example, as an entrepreneur, I founded something called the Eco Lumber Co-op, which brought together loggers, environmentalists, indigenous people around the solution of ecoforestry. And now as a lawyer, I represent indigenous people and fought the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I've clerked at the Supreme Court of Canada. I clerked with the Chief Justice of British Columbia. And as a lawyer acting internationally in New York for the top international arbitration firm in the world, I represented sovereign states in multi-billion-dollar international investment disputes. And here in BC, I've also run nonprofits. So I ran Smart Growth BC as executive director. I chaired Van Cities Community Foundation. And with all these skills and experiences, I think I can really strengthen the party, bring the strongest candidates together for the next election. And the reason I'm doing this is because the Green Party is in the best position to offer the solutions that British Columbia needs to move towards a zero carbon future. The whole planet's doing that, and BC should be at the forefront of that. And with my skills and experience, I can help the party get there. And it's another way that I can offer the solutions that for 30 years I've been trying to advance.
So why take the leap from going from your careers, your various careers and your life as a civilian to going for leader? You know, why not try and seek the nomination in a constituency and run as MLA first?
Because I want to be as effective as I can be. And for 30 years, I've been advancing the same issues that the Green Party stands for. And now's a chance, this leadership opportunity is a chance to contribute in a way that does a few things, in particular as leader that I wouldn't be able to do as an MLA. So one is to attract, and this is an important role for the leader, to attract the best candidates from across the province. I have experience working with a whole range of people from, of course, the legal community. I'm an accountant and an entrepreneur and have a background in finance. So I can talk to the business community in boardrooms. With the Eco Lumber Co-op, I worked a lot with tradespeople and with the building community and with developers. I've worked with Indigenous people for decades in various different settings. As a consultant, I worked with municipalities, so I'm comfortable talking with people and municipal leaders about the issues they face. I worked with environmental organizations for many years, and I'm comfortable talking with and inspiring people in the environmental community. So with all these experiences, I can attract these best candidates and be able to strengthen the party. And that's a unique thing that the leader can do. The other thing is on the platform side, and my experiences with all different sectors, it's helpful to develop the kind of platforms that are actually going to translate into solutions. As the Green Party, we can't be just about bumper stickers or sounding the alarm or saying, I wish things were better. We need to be able to understand how practically and quickly we can advance solutions. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about the platform ideas, but all of these focus on solutions, and my background and experience will allow me to lead the party in implementing them. So those are a couple differences that as a leader I would be able to bring. And again, I'm just trying to contribute in a way that's most effective.
Let's talk a bit about the platform. Your platform's titled Restarting BC. How would a Cam Brewer-led BC Green Party differentiate its recovery plan from the one that is in the process of being rolled out by the current government?
So the government in British Columbia has failed to recognize a few fundamental truths. And one of them is that we are not separate from nature. We're part of nature. And therefore, any solutions that we're going to come out with has to recognize that. Now, movement towards, as the NDP have done with things like built on the Liberal plan around LNG or the Site C plan or cutting the last old growth, these kinds of things ignore those truths. So instead, what's really different about the Green Plan and the things that are in my Restart plan has to do with recognizing the world is moving towards this zero carbon future, and BC either is in front of it or we're trying to catch up with an economy that worked for a few people decades ago and works for nobody now. The clean innovation parts of my economy and jobs part of the Restart plan has to do with doing that. So we need, for example, a clean innovation incubators. These are things that work with academic institutions across the province to ensure we have the best ideas, but work with entrepreneurs to ensure they have all the tools they need to get those ideas into action. And supporting this is a green bank. Now, this is something that's been proposed federally. It's something that we don't have in BC. But this is a financial institution that ensures that the different forms of capital that are required, whether it's patient capitals or whether it's equity investments, different sorts of vehicles in capital are available to entrepreneurs to put in place that clean innovation, because we can't just trust that entrepreneurs are going to be able to do it on their own. They need to be supported. They need that financing up front. So these are a couple pieces in the economy that would differentiate me from, or differentiate the Greens, from the NDP, because there's that big focus on actually making it happen and moving away from a fossil fuel-based economy. There's a couple other pieces that I'll mention up front that are different. One is a focus on different types of ownership structures. Now, I mentioned earlier that I started an Eco Lumber Co-op that brought together loggers and environmentalists and Indigenous people around the solution of ecoforestry. The co-op structure is critical to that kind of enterprise to ensure that what we do actually benefits as many people as possible. It's not just resource extraction or use of the natural resources in the province for the profit of a few. Rather, we ensure that the benefits are available to communities and to Indigenous people and to everyone involved. And those co-op structures can make that happen. Co-ops, of course, are also applicable in housing and many other sectors. So these are some things that would certainly make it different. I've got the last thing I think I'll mention that's important is around the idea of Indigenous law. Now, this is moving to the place where we recognize that Indigenous legal systems were here for, in a plurality among all the different Indigenous communities in BC for thousands of years. And those Indigenous legal systems did not go away. They still exist. They need to be revitalized and articulated in their contemporary form. And that will be the basis then for lasting justice, recognizing the plurality of legal systems in British Columbia.
So I want to follow up on the co-op thing. So I see in your platform you put quite a bit of emphasis on it, even going as far as to call for a new ministry based around it. But co-ops are already a thing that exists out there. You yourself were instrumental in founding one. What is the thing that needs to happen to make co-ops go the next step? Or I guess more of the question on what I'm trying to get at is, why do co-ops need support beyond the existing legal structures that already allow for them?
Great question. So when I started the Ecolumber Co-op, there were a few people it was the Ministry of Community Development and Cooperatives at the time, I think it was called. And that doesn't even exist anymore. But even at that time, when it was part of a ministry, there wasn't really anybody that spent much time working on it because there aren't that many co-ops. And the BC Cooperative Association has done great work advancing them. There's lots of understanding of them in certain sectors, but broadly they're seen as not being it's not being thought about as the primary business vehicle or enterprise vehicle. We have great success stories right in front of us, of course, from Van City Credit Union to Mountain Equipment Co-op and so on, but they aren't seen as the first choice necessarily for enterprise or even for housing. So it's partly a public education thing, but mostly it's about ensuring the support's there so that when someone comes forward with an idea, as I did with Ecolumber Co-op, the government gets behind it and ensures it happens and makes it happen. And then there's different aspects to co-ops that can work. So in BC now there's investment shares, so that helps with the capital side. And tying in that cooperative structure with the Green Bank ensures that the vehicle through which enterprise continues is the right one that provides benefits broadly. The capital is there, the financing is there, and the outcomes are directed towards the clean innovation and the zero carbon future and recognizing we're not separate from nature. So all those pieces together play an important role. Co-ops also have many different forms. So I've talked about some enterprise example. There's also housing co-ops so that people who in places in the province where real estate's so incredibly expensive, someone doesn't have to try and save up $2 or $3 million for a home. Instead, there's cooperative ownership, there's cooperative rental. With the cooperative ownership, people would be able to get equity and build up equity without that huge price tag to begin with. There's worker co-ops so that everyone involved in the enterprise can benefit. And we can apply co-ops more broadly to things like even resource tenures so that we have community forests, for example, in the province. There's other ways that the government can encourage communities to take ownership over management of local resources, ensuring that's done from a nature-based planning perspective, but the benefits are then provided to everyone in the community.
So one thing that I've seen in other areas of the world, in other manifestos or platforms, when it comes to co-ops and these kinds of different models of ownerships, is there's kind of two approaches. There's encouraging new businesses to start in these formats, and then there's incentives or even requirements that existing businesses have to go that way. So that could be either requiring a certain number of workers sit on a board, for example, or representation from, or that if a business goes under, then the workers get the first opportunity to buy it out into a co-op. Are you imagining either of those models, or are you more on the let's just encourage more to join the marketplace?
So with existing businesses, I certainly wouldn't put in place or propose putting in place any requirements that they change to co-ops. Now, with things that are tied more directly to the province, such as resource tenures, then there's more of an obvious connection there, and a requirement would make sense to move towards that, as opposed to private complete innovation that doesn't require public resources and resource tenures. Then there's no need to enforce that they be changed. But I'd be on the side of more encouraging it, and you encourage it by saying, look, the economy is going towards, as we've been talking about, this clean innovation, the idea of a zero carbon future. Those sorts of things, we can support people entrepreneurs, and especially starting those businesses with incentives, with encouragement, with the support to start them as cooperatives. And that includes tying that cooperative structure in with the way the Green Bank would be designed. So I'd be on the encouraging side, not the requirement side, but it's with new enterprises, we really want to try and direct them to do this. Now, the Greens in the past have, under Andrew Weavers, when he was leader of the Greens, put forward the B Corporation, which is a step in the right direction. These are corporations that have as well as the duty of directors, the fiduciary duty to the best interests of the shareholders or to the company, there's also a broadened duty, which includes sustainability and includes a specific purpose of the company, a social benefit purpose that could be artistic or educational or environmental and so on. And that's a step in the right direction. Co-ops just, I think, should play an even bigger role. And to answer your question, it's about incentivizing them and encouraging them and ensuring that more of them get going. And that all the supports are there from the province, from the financial institutions, particularly the Green Bank, but otherwise ensuring that people learn about them and are given the information and don't have to hunt it down. When I started the Coimbra Co-op, it was a bit of a struggle to find lawyers that knew about it, to find people in the government that knew about it, to find investors that were comfortable with it. So it's a cultural thing that has to change, and there's lots the government can do to lead the way.
In your platform, you talk a bit about the choice between sprawl or tall when it comes to communities and encouraging patterns of development to move away from that. But this is something that's been a very deliberate policy choice by municipalities across BC. And right now, although land use power is in theory a domain of the province, in practice it's being delegated out to the municipalities. How would you see the provincial government getting involved in actually addressing those issues?
So, of course, this land use planning in municipalities is entirely within the bailiwick of municipal governments. As you mentioned, of course, it flows from the constitutional power that's been given to the province that's then been delegated through various legal instruments to municipalities. But the way that the province can help is a few things. So one has to do with funding. Municipalities are chronically underfunded in things that they need to do. When sprawl happens, municipalities have to build the infrastructure to connect to sprawl. And that's something they can't really afford to do. So the province can instead pay for things like transit, pay for things like we're going to provide incentives for people to buy electric bicycles. We're going to provide we're going to put in an infrastructure of charging stations so that people can use electric cars locally. We're going to, for example, we could have road pricing, which could happen in certain jurisdictions, be administered by the province. And so that people living in certain places have to pay when they're driving on the roads. And that can be adjusted so it's fair, so that businesses don't have to pay as much, low-income people don't have to pay at all, rural areas aren't charged. But these are things that the province can do to help encourage dense, compact communities. In working with municipalities to do it. Now, I spent, as part of my work as a consultant, I worked with municipalities to develop sustainability plans and to work with them around sustainability goals. So I would work closely with municipalities to ensure that these are the right things that they need. But the starting place, I think, is to recognize that municipalities in making these decisions really want to be able to provide the best services for the people that live there, and the province can help them get to that place. The other thing about municipalities and the density piece that you're talking about, tall, not the tall versus sprawl thing, but instead having multi-unit housing, having distributed throughout the communities, ensuring that everybody has things around them that they need, the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood and so on. All that stuff can be supported by having more nature in cities. And the province can help by encouraging and providing the resources so that this happens. One of the key things in the municipal budget is often the replacement of infrastructure. So the hard infrastructure, for example, around pipes that take rainwater away. Much of that was built in municipalities in the 50s and 60s. It's crumbling now. It needs to be repaired. Municipalities can't afford it. Across Canada, there's billions and billions of dollars worth of infrastructure that needs to be repaired. Municipalities can't afford to do that. So instead, what can happen is green infrastructure. So the province can help municipalities ensure that green infrastructure is put in place. So what that means is trees and multi-layered vegetation and permeable surfaces so that water, when it lands, doesn't have to go into these pipes that we can't afford to fix and replace. Instead, goes into the soil, and nature takes care of the rainwater as it otherwise would. And that means the municipality doesn't have to pay for fixing the gray infrastructure. It also allows for streets to be repurposed from automobiles to green infrastructure amenities. That allows businesses to expand into those areas. Now we're seeing with COVID, more businesses are taking place outside. And it would be nice if those areas were also green and vegetated. That would encourage more people to cycle and to walk and so on. And the province can help doing that by giving municipalities power to make these environmental decisions. Under the community charter, for example, the ability of municipalities to advance environmental for legislation bylaws for environmental purposes have to be agreed with the province. So a municipality trying to ban plastic bags, for example, that we can change that. So if municipalities want to advance bylaws that will allow for environmental purposes, we can just let them go ahead and do that. So there's supportive things that the province can do, and the economics of it has to be right. So the province can help pay for things like transit and so on, and road pricing that will allow municipalities to make the decisions that they can afford to do while advancing these goals of density and livability.
So I liked a lot of what was said there, but being a fairly close observer of local politics and watching something even as minor as the decision to allow duplexes across the city of Vancouver being highly contentious, and the fact that local governments are often very change resistant, it seems to me that just encouraging or giving more tools might not necessarily actually lead to those outcomes. And several jurisdictions in the US are looking at more kind of higher level, state level, in our case, provincial level legislation that more constrains what municipalities can do and pushes them towards adopting more environmentally sustainable zoning practices, for example. Do you see a role for similar legislation in BC?
There might be. It's a good point, because Oregon, for example, has banned the zoning of single-family residential areas, single-family home residential areas. And in Metro Vancouver, the city of Vancouver in particular, there's denser areas. Of course, we know where those are in the West End and along False Creek and so on. And then there's areas where there's just a sea of single-family homes. And when laneway homes were introduced initially, this was something that people in particular neighborhoods in Vancouver, single family homes, larger lots, more expensive homes. Initially, there was a lot of resistance to laneway homes. But then one goes in, then another goes in. And after a while, people start to think, you know what, it's not so bad. It allows my family members to be there, especially families with older children who are now living on their own. Maybe that's a great place for them to be, or vice versa, families with older relatives who want to live there. And people know, and they're done well. Laneway housing can be beautiful, and there's great architects and design and construction firms that are building that kind of housing. And then it's accepted. So slowly it's starting to change. The province, whether we get to the point where we're going to ban certain types of zoning, I actually would think it would be a good idea, but I would have to discuss it with municipalities, because from a climate change point of view, the most effective thing that a municipality can do is improve density. It's not at the site scale. It's not at the retrofits. It's not at the individual building scale, though that all helps. But the most effective thing is density, for all the reasons that we know about reducing the needs for transportation, about buildings that are connected to each other and therefore save energy and heating and cooling, that the types of communities that come up are healthier and so on. I would be interested in looking at sweeping legislation that would ensure that we end up with a position that density is encouraged in municipalities, but I would want to do it in conjunction with the Union of BC Municipalities. I'd want to consult to discuss that idea further, because if incentives can happen, and there's what the province can do to help municipalities get there in their own way, I do believe that these kind of decisions are best made by the government that's closest to the community itself, and fully believe in the importance of those decisions being made by local governments.
Oh man, we could probably talk about cities and the interaction with provincial policy all day, but there's a lot of other elements to your platform that I want to get into. And then I even want to make sure we ask you a few more questions about just like the positioning of the race and how you would win the election. But I want to pivot and talk a bit about the health section of your platform. And there's a lot I like in there around improving access to universal dentistry, optometry, all these things that I think are slowly becoming consensus, although the question is, how do we afford it? But what stuck out a bit to me was the line about speedy recovery with universal access to massage therapists, chiropractors, physiotherapists, and acupuncturists. And I can see where that would get a little bit controversial, as this sort of fits in with the green brand as being a little connected with alternative medicine, sometimes bordering on pseudoscientific practices, especially in some of the more fringier elements of some of those claims. So how do you defend, or so how do you position the necessity of that when healthcare dollars will always be finite, and we should probably try to ensure they are on the treatments with the best evidence for them?
I'm not sure that I'd agree that chiropractors or physical therapists are a fringe healthcare. I think that they're essential. I mean, someone who, it's totally anecdotal, but I have a strong belief that these range of healthcare options help because they avoid people just going to a family doctor or to emergency, which is more expensive.
Sorry, I don't want to malign the massage therapists and physiotherapists. I do see a lot of value there. And I think there is a little bit of value for some evidence on chiropractic and back pain, although the evidence for acupuncture is pretty limited the last I've checked for it. But I'll let you go on.
Sure. So without debating about the efficacy of all these things, I do believe that people should have a choice, that these healthcare practitioners offer people an alternative to the more expensive going to emergency or a family doctor and so on. And the other thing that's really important now in the times of COVID, and this is in the platform too, of course, that's there, is ensuring there's access to therapists and counselors so that people's mental health is maintained during stressful times, because that also saves money in the longer term. It allows people to not get into a situation where they're self-medicating and there's dangers of addiction. We also ensure that people are more productive and happy and the best that they can be as human beings. And I see that as an investment. The other side of healthcare that's in the platform that I think we really need to remember is the preventative side. And that's why there's a couple things in there that are about that. One is about access to nature, and the other is the right to a healthy environment. So I proposed an environmental charter. There are 156 countries in the world that have the right to clean air, clean water, healthy ecosystems. Canada is not among those countries. BC can, although we can't change on our own, the Constitution of Canada to enact, to have a constitutional right to that. What we can in BC is pass legislation to put an environmental charter in place that gives British Columbians those rights. And that means that we'll benefit from having healthier environment. And the nature part really is fascinating. And there's a subject of a book I'm working on with Herb Hamm and Sean Markey about ensuring people have access to nature and restoring ecosystems in urban areas. And when people spend time in nature, they have fewer incidences of health problems, fewer diseases. They get sick less often. When they do get sick, they recover faster. They're more productive at work. They're happier. They're more creative. In children, when children play in a built environment, so you can imagine you've got a 1-year-old, so wait a little bit longer. But when kids go to the playground and they've got equipment to climb on, ladders and teeter-totters and climbing equipment and so on, what emerges is a type of play that's very competitive and very much focused on dominance and aggression. When children play in nature, what emerges is a pattern of play that's about cooperation, it's about creativity. So different values come out, and children benefit from being in nature too, with they're better able to concentrate, they're happier, they're all these things. So it's a very beneficial on the preventative health side to have access to nature, and that's what the environmental charters.
I think that covers the first three planks. Pivoting to the last plank of your platform there, equity. The one thing I want to ask about, there's lots we could talk about, but you mentioned guaranteed income or universal basic income in there. I'm curious to hear a bit more in detail, because those terms get thrown around a lot, and BC is in the midst of having a study on the basic income. And I think the authors released a paper that we had Lindsay Teds talk about on the show a couple months ago about how before we need to start moving towards specificity, because these questions raise a lot of questions, or these ideas raise a lot of questions, and it's all about trade-offs. Do you make it universal? Well, then it costs a lot more, or do you have some kind of income cutoff? So what is your guaranteed income? What's the starting point when you talk about guaranteed income?
Admittedly, this is at a generality level in the platform, and it's an important conversation that people who already are fine and don't need an additional income, but we can remedy that with tax measures. So it comes in on one side and goes out on another. But the thing, what this is supposed to be doing, what's important about it is that it ensures people who between jobs, when things like COVID come along and unexpectedly the employment situation is very different. People think of people working in small businesses that suddenly can't operate because of social distancing requirement. We see those closing all the time. This ensures that the people who work there don't have to worry about the basics of life while their kids are also at home because school with COVID and so on. They can get on with trying to figure out what's next. And that's an investment. That's an investment to ensure that people are able to contribute to the best of their ability very soon. Now, related to this, the guaranteed income piece has benefits all across the board. And so we think about it in the context. You think about the small businesses I just mentioned, for example, and I propose also a small business roundtable because talking to all the businesses across the province that are suffering different implications because of COVID, and they need different responses. So having a roundtable figures out what's going to work for different sectors. We don't want to just say top down, this is what the best answer is. What works for a restaurant might not be the same for a tap room with a microbrewery, might not be the same for a retail, might not be the same for a small family-owned manufacturing business. That's what the roundtable is for. And by supporting small businesses, then people will be able to make that transition and less likely falling through the cracks. But the universal basic income helps the employees get to that new stage, the new normal, as it were, and the owners as well. So it is at a generality here, and I would want to be able to talk with experts who have looked into this and ensure that we implement it in the right way. But those objectives of what it does as an investment in society is the purpose for it.
Somewhat related to that, the idea of a 4-day work week has been floated in this leadership race. Do you have thoughts on that?
We already have a 4-day work week or a 3-day work week or whatever employers and employees or their representatives want to be able to negotiate. And that's fine. And in some sectors that works well, and others it doesn't. But what the government needs to be focusing on now is the fact that we've got at least 11% unemployment in July. We have 29% among young people. The small businesses I just mentioned are struggling. People are uncertain about the economic future. So we don't need to be interfering and providing people with forced time off or something. What we need to do is provide people with jobs. That's what people want now. So get the economy working so people are stable. So that's where I would put the focus. It's already there for people who want to be able to have that happen. And we've seen with COVID lots of flexibility in working situations. It'll be interesting to see as how many people go back to a classic office environment. And that's where a 4-day work week might work, and employers and employees can figure it out. In other settings, it doesn't work at all. And we certainly can't expect that with the economic uncertainty happening that people take a pay cut. Now, from an environmental point of view, the research is clear that if people work fewer days a week, their carbon footprint drops, but only if their income drops. Because if people have lower income, they're going to buy less stuff, they're going to be traveling less, their carbon footprint goes down. But I'm certainly not behind a plan that's going to tell people to make 20% less income. So
that answer reminds me a bit of what Andrew Weaver said in albeit I think more eloquently, and maybe it was just Weaver's tendency on Twitter to be a bit brash and abrasive, and that's what Twitter does to us all. But I don't want to debate the 4-day work week anymore. I wanted to pivot because Andrew Weaver was in the news for coming onto your advisory council. Was that an endorsement?
This week we brought out some endorsements, but I intentionally during this campaign decided not to go with endorsements because endorsements are a snapshot, at one point in time, a flash in the pan, a statement, yeah, I support this person, then we move on. What the advisory council does is these are people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and actually, as I become leader, help the party figure out the best way forward. And this is the start of the advisory council in a short campaign. You can get some people on it, some really fantastic people, and I'm honored that everyone on that council has stepped forward, including Andrew. But going forward, these are people who will help make things happen. Now, Andrew's on that council to talk about climate scientists. He is a world-leading expert. He's a lead author in the second, third, fourth, fifth report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's authored or co-authored more than 200 papers on climate and related science. He's written 2 books about the climate emergency. Of course, I want someone like that on my council to advise about climate science. Whether you call that endorsement or not, I don't know. But he's on the advisory council to help figure out climate science, which to me has way more benefit than a one-time statement about, I think this is a good person or whatever.
Got a couple more questions about the more politics aspect of this, but there's one last thing I wanted to ask about the platform before we move on to that just piqued my curiosity very briefly, and that's mention about creating an electric car industry here in BC and building electric cars here in BC. And BC typically hasn't had a vehicle manufacturing industry. There's a lot of parts related to that sub-supplier. It's quite an evolved industry. Why pick that one as the industry to invest or trade in BC going forward compared to something else in the clean energy space?
Because Jerry Kroll already picked it. Jerry Kroll's on my advisory committee as well. He runs a company that builds small one-person electric vehicles and wanted to develop a plant here in BC building them and employ Indigenous people as well. He got in touch with the innovation commissioner and said, I want to do this. And then never heard back. The province ignored him. And now he's thinking, maybe I'll have to build this plant outside of BC. So it's one example of exactly what shouldn't be happening. We can't be focusing on these resource-based, fossil fuel-based economies from decades ago. We need to focus on what the world is going to now. So there's one example, but there's lots of other clean innovation things we should be building in BC. Maybe it's not for the next entrepreneur, maybe it's not the electric car, maybe it's the charging station, maybe it's a different type of solar panel, maybe it's a different way to hold clean energy, maybe it's other pieces of the puzzle apps that are used to ensure that people can find shared electric vehicles. There's lots of components to it, and the platform certainly isn't supposed to be exhaustive, but it's an example of why can't we do this? There's a company in Quebec that is now making electric snowmobiles. Why isn't that company in BC? And so with all different areas of transportation, just as an example, this province is filled with brilliant, energetic, innovative entrepreneurs that care about the planet and want to do something. The province just has to get behind them. So that's what this is about.
I think we'll wrap up in a couple questions, but I did want to ask a question about diversity. We have 3 party leaders, or in the last election, we had 3 major party leaders who are all white men, and and then we had 2 party leaders named Andrew for a while. I think many Greens saw this as the chance to put a woman in charge and have a prominent woman on the BC Poly stage. Obviously, you stand for your own and you can't be someone you're not, but how do you respond to those suggestions and the arguments that we need more diversity in BC politics?
Well, we do need more diversity, and the role of a leader is to make space for voices that otherwise aren't heard. The role of a leader is to be a leader of leaders, to have other people shine, to be their best. It's a facilitator. And that's what I would do as leader. That's what I've done through the 30 years of working on advancing issues related to the Green Party. My advisory council, certainly the youth and the endorsements are an attempt to begin that process that I would continue. I have a long history of working with Indigenous people in the province and collaborating, and continue to do that as a lawyer. I act for Indigenous people. And when we move forward into attracting candidates, it's incredibly important for the leader to attract the full range of people across the province. So I would do that, including young people who haven't really had a role in as much as they should. I'm a professor and teach environmental law at SFU. My students always inspire me and motivate me about what can be done with the future. And young people offer that and have been involved heavily in my campaign, doing probably the majority of work in the campaign and leading all aspects of it. My role as leader is to make that space for other people. And part of the diversity, though, the Green Party has to do with the segments of British Columbia that believe and get behind what the party's doing. So I've made a very strong effort during this campaign to reach out to communities that historically wouldn't really be involved in the Green Party. We've reached out to the Latin American community, for example, the Japanese Canadian community, the South Asian community. In fact, I've appeared on 2 different South Asian radio stations doing interviews, and there's people on my team from the South Asian community, and been reaching out intentionally to the South Asian community. The Indigenous community, as I mentioned, for decades I've been working with Indigenous people, and continue to see Indigenous people at the forefront of the recovery in BC and the future of entrepreneurs. And I've spoken about Indigenous reconciliation, the revitalization of Indigenous law. Val Napoleon and I had a great conversation, a Zoom conversation. It's on the website, cambrewer.ca, under events. So I'm committed to that. And the role of the leader is to make it happen. It's not just about me. It's about the entire party and of all the riding association and everyone that's involved.
So you have quite a challenge ahead of you. You're going up against a fairly well-known MLA for the leadership race, and if you are successful, there's likely to be a general election within the next year or so. How do you see yourself being able to deal with those challenges and lead not only your own leadership campaign, but the Dream Party in general to victory?
So a couple parts to your question. First, about the race itself. There's 3 candidates in this race. I've been very happy with how the campaign has rolled out. We've been getting great responses from people all across the province. I'm honored with the advisory council that we pulled together, and I'm feeling very good about the campaign. As far as what happens when I become leader, then yes, there'll be, like with any party, a time to prepare for the next election, to reach out to the riding associations, to work with them to ensure we have the best candidates. The party, I know internally, has already been doing a lot of work. I would look forward to working with Kim and Sonia and making that happen, with Adam, with everybody else in the party. Nina Campbell, as the new executive director, brings incredible skills and insights to the party. So we've got a strong team. I'm one part of that. And I would, as leader, ensure that our goal is to attract the best candidates, to build on our experience and our success in Southern Vancouver Island and move into the Lower Mainland. We need, as a party, to be able to have a presence in the Lower Mainland and to show people that we have the ability to manage all portfolios, not just the environment, including the economy. My background as an accountant and as a business person, I can speak to that, and expand all across the province so that people of every corner of the province and all different backgrounds and experiences see the Green Party as a home. And that's the role of the leader, to inspire that in people that are watching, to inspire that in the riding associations, in the candidates, in all the other people that have already contributed a great amount to the party.
You've been more than generous with your time. I think we went a little over what we promised you. Maybe you can just close off by telling the people, the registration's already closed for the Green Party. So for those Green members who are listening, maybe tell them where to find out more about you and how to vote.
Great.
And,
thank you.
So any closing words you have.
Sure. So to get more information about me and my campaign, the website is cambrewer.ca. Voting starts on September 5th, on Saturday, September 5th, and goes until the 13th. If you've registered, you'll receive, as I understand, an email from the party with instructions on how to vote. Please do that. Please tell everyone that to vote if they've registered also. It's an important election, an important exercise of our democratic responsibility. And I hope that by doing that, we can really ensure the Greens are in a position to lead the world in this transformation that with clean innovation. We've got to get in front of moving to a zero carbon future. We've got to put in place the ownership structures that will allow every British Columbian to benefit from. That includes the cooperative. We've got to advance Indigenous reconciliation in a meaningful way. We've got to recognize that we are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. And then by doing that's where the solutions come. So I thank everybody who has registered to vote. Please do that starting the 5th of September. And I thank everyone for listening tonight. Ian and Scott, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's jump into our next segment, let the horse race begin. So there has been a lot of speculation about a fall election, and seeing as it's the last kind of week of summer here and nothing else is really going on, let's join in that speculation a bit.
So the first big thing that came out is there were a couple new polls here in BC. One of them put the NDP at 51% and the Liberals under 30%. I think they were sitting at 3.35. I think they were sitting at 25% even. So 338canada.com, one of the election poll aggregators, this one by PJ Fournier from Maclean's, he just announced yesterday his latest projection, which is that the BC NDP would get about 47% based on the polls, the Liberals 32%, and the Greens 15%, and maybe 6% for the Conservatives, but it's always hard to tell with the BC Conservatives.
They count.
They're in the polls sometimes, so you have to model them or else your poll model gets really broken. Like modeling BC is really tough, so take these with a deep grain of salt, but all of the polls have been pretty consistent that the NDP is doing significantly better than the Liberals. And if you take this projection, the NDP have a 99.9% chance of winning a majority, and that would be a 60 to 25 seat majority, with the Greens holding on to 2.
So they could kick a puppy and still win the election, is what you're saying?
Almost getting there. I don't think Horgan could shoot someone on Front Street. Or, damn it, what's the main street in Victoria? Douglas? Yeah. Or Government, those are the ones. I don't think Horgan could shoot someone on Douglas Street and really keep his popularity, but with the projection the way it is, the Liberals only have 2 safe seats officially versus a lot of ones that are leaning their way, and those are Peace River North and South, which are probably always going to be Liberal. But the Liberals are on a really bad trajectory.
It's definitely not great for them. On the other hand, this is somewhat what you'd expect from a crisis polling sort of situation, and the BC NDP haven't really done anything yet to disrupt the crisis status quo, so to speak, and really inject politics back into things. Now, if the school opening goes badly, that could change pretty quick, but it really does seem to be a bit of a rally around the flag and leader effect that's been more persistent in BC than elsewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy in Alberta these days, and people are getting really, I think, antsy and frustrated with the approach Jason Kenney's taken. Now, whether they are willing to park their vote back with Rachel Notley is to be determined. The Ontario Liberals have been stronger since they lost Kathleen Wynne, but Ford is also sitting high on a little bit of a bump. He inevitably, I think, will go back to his ways. And federally, we've seen things not go well for Trudeau, largely of his own making. Being leader during a crisis isn't a guaranteed bump. You can always still be your own worst enemy.
Yeah, and Horgan's done, and the BC NDP overall have done a good job of, I guess, not screwing things up and more or less taking the directions of the public health officer into account. So yeah, they haven't done anything that would dislodge the perception that they're more or less handling things well, with maybe one very minor exception of a bit of a kerfuffle this past week over a not entirely accurate back to school ad. But other than that, it's been pretty consistent. I don't think these polls have even really captured that, even if there's an effect.
Yeah, and on the other side of the aisle, you have the Liberals who can't seem to find their ground on where to criticize the government. There are areas, the overdose crisis is a clear one, but the Liberals haven't presented a clear, here's how we would attack this situation differently, or even on the schools, they haven't really presented an alternative. They don't have access to as much information, but they could at least say, why aren't we delaying things, or why?
Yeah,
they could start to try to paint
parties
something,
are there
but
to oppose and point out all the flaws, and you don't necessarily, if you're not running an election, have to have a "this is how we do things in the government's position" full detailed plan you can roll up, but you at least have to have a general criticism and critique of them that is coherent and actually points to real issues or real perceived challenges. They haven't really found something that lands in that respect. And to be honest, they haven't since 2017, but the inability to find a direction of criticism that really resonates with British Columbians is particularly pronounced now.
And then you have the BC Greens, who are just wrapping up their leadership race. And as we discussed, we'll know by the middle of the month who the leader will be there. And then the question will be, will that person, whether it's first to now Darwin or Brewer, be able to gain the traction and keep up the momentum that Weaver has built for the party, even though I think they struggled a bit more recently to get more prominence, even where the Greens have done some effective things on the legislative scene in terms of holding up key bills. But for most British Columbians, the question of why would I vote Green right now when, unless I guess you're smiting about Site C and thinking we need to go
but there's
even harder on Clean BC.
There's only got to be like a half dozen people in the province for whom Site C is like their top number one ballot box question. It's not going to be enough to propel the Greens into the next couple of ridings they have to win, or even really, I think, be particularly resonant on the South, or even be particularly resonant on the South Island, where their base is and where they have the most likely chance to add to their seat holdings.
And the other element of election speculation, particularly in the last couple days, has been a couple big name announcements in the nomination news front. And we haven't really kept up with all the nomination news, so I thought I'd do a little bit of a breakdown. But first, kind of an announcement as something to do for the next while, or something to help everyone who's a BC Poly follower. We put together a little spreadsheet, and we'll throw a link on social media and in the show notes of all the constituencies out there and who the current candidates are for nomination and who's been nominated, so we can keep track of all of this as best as we can. I don't think anyone's done it, so we've done it, and you can now use it. And if you have tips for that, send them to us either by DM or ian@politicos.ca. But the big news today was MP Finn Donnelly from the federal NDP wants to jump in to run in Coquitlam Mountain against Joan Isaacs.
Pick a seat that you try and want to pick off from the Liberals. That's as good a one as any. There was an 87 vote difference last time. So it's like clearly the easiest pickup anywhere. So I suppose why not try and get that one?
Yeah, and Finn Donnelly represents Port Moody Coquitlam right now. He's pretty widely respected as far as I can tell in the federal caucus. A bit focused on salmon, but it is an important issue. And he could do a lot on the fishing front at the provincial level, at least for salmon.
That does not actually represent the riding federally because he did not run in the 2019 election.
All right. He was one of the ones to take a bit of a break from caucus to
decided not to try and hold on to the NDP's not particularly great. Yeah, I guess he, just decided to jump ship when the NDP looked like they were in not great position. That's probably wasn't a terrible.
Similarly, Nathan Cullen is being talked about for the northern riding of Skeena, currently held by Liberal Elis Ross.
Okay, but at the same time, isn't Nathan Cullen always talked about anytime there's an election about him making the jump to provincial politics? I mean, his name always
came up
comes
for
up.
Federal leader. It comes up for lots of different things. I think he's just someone people like columnists, and probably because he's a pretty friendly guy. He's easy to get along with if you've ever met him in person or seen him talk in person. So maybe that's why people want to see more of him. But maybe it'll be true.
One of these times it eventually has to be.
But I think what the narrative of at least Finn Donnelly, if not also Cullen, whether that pans out or not, is that in terms of being active in the NDP right now at any level, there's probably more excitement at the BC provincial level than definitely at the federal level or most other provinces. Here we have government and the the majority.
Yeah, if you're a federal NDP MP, it's going to be a case of being the perpetual opposition. Best case scenario, if you manage to get a Hail Mary and repeat the 2011 showing, maybe even official opposition, but the NDP is just not forming government federally, so I can see why politicians who want to actually do things
There's a
be looking at
very
other levels of
slim
government.
chance that the federal government goes to an election, it comes out in a very similar situation, and the NDP and gets a formal coalition with the Liberals, and there a few New Democrats decide to take cabinet seats, which would be somewhat unprecedented federally. More likely we'd see more confidence in supply agreement type things, but that's probably the highest they could hope for federally. Realistically, you have a pretty straightforward path to cabinet if you take a seat from Elis Ross or other high-profile BC Liberal. But there are some people hoping to be high-profile BC Liberals. The Liberals have been slowly running their ready-to-run campaign and have been nominating candidates in their kind of key target ridings. I jotted the names in the show notes. Any of these jump out at you as particularly interesting?
I think James Robertson in Port Moody Coquitlam presents quite an interesting candidate there. So he's a leadership coach, consult, and veteran, and someone I follow on Twitter quite a bit, and I think has more to say than just the typical BC Liberal, somewhat warmed over talking points. So he's definitely one I'd be watching, and I think has the hustle to really get out there and actually do
he'd
the
hope to
on-the-ground
knock off
politicking needed.
current MLA Rick Glumac. David Gruel, whose name was familiar when I saw that he's the nominee in Vancouver Fraser View. Now, trying to take George Heyman out will be a long shot for the BC Liberals. Nevertheless, Gruel was familiar as he ran for the NPA in the 2018 municipal election in Vancouver. He founded the Absolute Energy Natural Gas Company, which they do, I guess, the market, or not the marketing, but the market selling, buying and selling, make money that way. I can't remember much other than seeing David Gruel's signs, but there were so many council candidates that it was really hard to keep track of them all.
And he's running in Vancouver Fraserview, which if there is a Liberal pickup in Vancouver, that's probably it. But as we were talking at the start of the segment, they're going to have a tough time just holding on to all their Vancouver seats. I think it's pretty unlikely they actually pick up something in the city of Vancouver itself. More likely than not, he's not going to be successful there. I suppose the other person to really look at on this list would be the candidate in Courtney Comots. Now, that was the other very noteworthy riding for how close it was in 2017. Slightly less close than the one Finn Donnelly's running in Burke Mountain, but that was also a nail biter, and that went into recounts to figure that one out. Plus, he also has an engineering background with a precast concrete company, so like him on that front, because that's just simplifier to me. But so those I think he'd be the other person I'd be watching in this race, just because where things are.
Yeah, there's a few other candidates have been nominated that we can just run through. Bruce Banmin in Abbotsford South, assuming Plekis doesn't run, which seems to be the safe money right now, although he's mused both ways. Schrodinger's candidacy. Banmin's a current city councillor, former mayor of Abbotsford. He beat out two rivals for that nomination. Oak Bay Gordon Head is also going to be a really interesting seat because that did used to be a BC Liberal one, but the NDP has also been somewhat growing there, but that was held is held right now by Andrew Weaver and was the Greens' first pickup. Roxanne Helm is going to be the candidate there.
And Andrew Weaver is like the liberalist Green out there. Was not a huge stretch in terms of the general orientation of the candidate beyond a.
And then I can't remember if we talked about Cheryl Ashley when she won the nomination in Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, former school trustee and counselor out there who seems pretty prominent in the community. And then there's Karen Kirkpatrick in West Vancouver Capilano, who will try to win Ralph Sultan's seat. She's been CEO of a lot of things, most recently Family Services of Greater Vancouver, and has been on the board of many other things. Quite a accomplished CV for her. And that seems like a pretty safe BC Liberal seat. But lots more nominations to come. We haven't seen any from the BC Greens yet, to my knowledge, because they're in the midst of a leadership race, and I imagine there's going to be some desire to see who wins before they commit to running for the party.
Yeah, although it wouldn't surprise me if the leadership candidates who aren't current MLAs, the two of them, they each come from different spots on, yeah, got that. They each come from different ridings within BC. So more likely than not, they'll probably be the candidates in those ridings, but that still does leave another 80 plus to fill. And yeah, so far nothing there, and I'd expect, like you said, it's going to be after the leadership
and I know
race before they
the
can start
BC
thinking
Liberals
about that.
and BC Greens both have forms out looking for talented, smart, enthusiastic people who want to carry those flags in the next election. So visit those websites if you want to get engaged.
Yeah,
I'm sure the NDP will start to be looking as well.
The Liberals have been the Liberals have been on a recruiting drive for at least a year now for their candidates. So they're looking pretty aggressively out there. So I expect there's a bunch more we'll be hearing from shortly as they nominate the next batch. Yeah, it wasn't so much that Bonnie Henry. It's an ad the province put out about back to school featuring Bonnie Henry, and it drew a fair bit of criticism because it shows her in a classroom talking to, I believe it was 6 students, which astute listeners will note is significantly smaller than the number of people expected to be in classrooms once school reopens. And that drew a fair bit of ire from both the teachers' unions and parents who are concerned about the safety of having a bunch of kids crowded in classrooms when school reopens, which wasn't great. And then it also came out that part of the reason they had such a small group was because they didn't necessarily consider it safe to have a large group in there for filming, which does not speak well to how
public health messaging and comms have been really good. Like, this is the first big miss for their communications department, and it was somewhat predictable, I think, if you just came at it from an outside lens and went, but that's not what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and it does, I think, undermine both the government in general and, unfortunately as well, Dr. Henry, who had gotten quite a bit of respect and adoration for how she's handled things to date. But on the public health comms aspect, this was a pretty big misstep that does undermine trust in a fairly big way. I think it definitely it can be seen as the government and the public health officer not presenting accurate information, which in a crisis is a really unfortunate and damaging.
Well, and the other half of the update for schools and reopening is Minister Rob Fleming this afternoon announced what's going to be done with the money coming from the federal government. The first update is that it's going to come in 2 checks, one to cover the fall and one for the spring. And what they've decided to do is to just pass that money on to the school districts and let them apportion it how they need to. So they don't actually have to make any decisions. They can let all of the districts do. So each district will get the amount of money proportional to how many students they have. There'll be some for independent schools and a bit of money for other forms of education as well. But most of it will be going to the public school districts. They can use it to hire more teachers for online learning, although hiring teachers to start in 5 days is going to be not possible. But hopefully they can get more as it becomes clear how many parents and families want to go in each route. They could also hire more cleaning staff, buy more hand sanitizer, or whatever they decide in that district they need to do. I think there was also talk of setting up Wi-Fi hotspots in remote and rural communities so that people in those areas are able to still access online learning if they need to do that, buying laptops and things like that for students who can't otherwise afford it. So all the options are there, but now it requires another level of government to make decisions, which, it probably had to go this way, just the way our education system is structured. But this would have been good to have decisions made about 3 months ago and not, like I said, less than a week before schools are open officially.
Yeah, in terms of figuring out what to spend money on quickly, yeah, putting it to the local school boards is definitely, I think, the right way to go on that. But like I said last week, it's just such a case of why the hell did it take this long? Everyone knew what was going to happen at the start of September. This should not be being figured out in the final days of August and the first days of September. It's good the money's coming, but it was a failure in how it actually got rolled out. And that has been Playtoast. Find links to everything we talked about at playtoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Playtoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.